How are you?
I'm well. We just left Germany, and Germany's always really kind. They were early to the party, I guess. And so we finished up the last German show yesterday in Stuttgart, and now we get to do Holland and then Belgium, and then we go to the UK on, I guess it's Sunday? Sunday, yeah.
Well, before we going further about your latest album and what you're doing now, I'd like to jump back to the beginning quickly.
Sure.
Do you remember the first song you wrote?
I do remember the first song I wrote. I was in a band, I guess I was about 12 or 13, and I was into heavy metal.
Okay.
And the band was me and a few friends, and we thought it would be cool to call the band Vespertillion, which is Latin for creature of the night.
Okay.
Very mysterious, very metal. And the first song we wrote was called Morbosis of the Mind, and it was the death of your mind, and it was about drug use.
And well, very early age. So those. Do you remember what compelled you to write? What got you into creating your own song?
Well, for the first song, I think we were just trying to play at the talent show at school.
Okay.
And so we needed a song. And so the song was a means to the end of performance. But eventually you start to realize that the performance is fleeting and happens, once a day. And that the songs outlast. So the shift, the focus shifts over time, hopefully, in that you want to make more long-standing songs and let the performance kind of be the performance.
And so at this age, you're very into music, like say metal and
yeah.
So what did songwriting do for you in opposed to kind of playing other people's music, like doing covers or?
I never really thought about why we wrote songs instead of did covers. I don't know. I guess pretty early on it was apparent to me that if we played covers, it was it was not going to be like my authentic or our authentic voice coming out, right. Which I guess maybe now that I'm older, I don't know that I fully agree with that. You can do amazing covers and be a very compelling musical act if you do covers. But I guess early on we were pretty enamored with the Misfits and Metallica and punk and metal colliding, when I was 12 or 13, or maybe it was more like 14, but and all those bands were doing their own music, so we thought, well, we should try that too.
Mm-hmm. And especially those early years, looking back now, were they important to kind of form the type of musician you are now? Yeah,
I think more and more, the older I get, often so the new record just came out, and everyone that is new to the music that I make says, punk rock singer-songwriter or punk rock troubadour or whatever, they use those terms. And I think that what they're probably responding to is the delivery of the song. And I learned all that delivery of the song as a kid, right. Playing in first sort of a metal context, but really the first performances that I did were in a punk rock band. And so you're learning how to deliver like an exciting or like a rush of energy. And so I think that sticks with you. When you get older, you still, even if you're changing the kinds of songs that you're writing or you're more focused on the craft or whatever, I still think that the delivery needs to be exciting and you want to play a show that you'd want to be at. And so I think that's maybe one of the most lasting things about coming from the punk rock paradigm.
And do you remember, or is there maybe a gig that sticks out from those days? or a memory?
Oh yeah, I remember a lot of those gigs. It's funny, I remember a lot of the early shows with my very first band, Step Ahead, more than I remember like gigs from last year. You know, because again, they're very formative. You know, it's your first time playing your first show, or your first time opening at a really big rock club or something. You know, those are really you know, romantic memories. You know, whereas once it becomes a job or whatever, well, like once you're in the business of touring, I guess, you're playing a show every day. It inevitably, even if you do your best to keep it special, they just sort of run into each other sometimes. So the formative years are the ones that stick with you. You know.
In that sense, then, is that a difficult thing to deal with, where you're on the one side you have the creative element and then the art, and on the other side you have a very business, very...
I hesitate to say that it's difficult because, like, I've done real work, you know. I've been a contractor and worked in restaurants as a dishwasher, or even as a manager, or waiter, or whatever. And to me, that's a lot harder than you know, the difficulties that come with balancing a music career. But that said, this is hard work, you know, especially the way that we do it. There's not a lot of days off. You're in very close proximity with a lot of people all the time, and you're one of the most difficult balances to strike is the fact that you're always on. You know, you're always doing something social, which can be somewhat draining, you know, and that's different from the creative energy as well. But yeah, I guess it can be difficult, but I always try to keep the perspective of you know, like my dad has worked the same job for 40 years. You know, he works for a quarry and paving company, and he works in, you know, as an accountant, and that's hard. You know, that's a long time to spend at the same place. And he would love to do this kind of work. And so I try to think of him or think of my friends at home that are plumbers and electricians and carpenters that are working with their hands and, you know, beating their bodies up. I try to think of that when it gets difficult.
So is that where you get your work ethic, your father?
Yeah, I would say that's where, you know, the whole, the neighborhood and the city that I was raised in is a working class place. And I've always surrounded myself as I've played music with people that are like-minded. I mean, Chuck Ragan is certainly a working class guy, and you know, guys like Franz Nicolai or the Gaslight Anthem guys, like they come from working class roots, and they work hard. You know, they work 6 or 7 days a week. They do all the press that they can possibly do, you know, because they look at it as an opportunity to get their music across. And I guess that's where it comes from, is being raised in a working class town where there was always a ceiling. You know, there was always a limit to what you could do and a limit to what you could, how much you could reach.
So and this is Philadelphia. So when did kind of, because I hear this every once in a while where artists tell me that they like you say, there is a ceiling, and people say, no, you can't be a musician, you can't live off that. And so when for you was the turning point that you thought, no, I'm going to go for it and I'm going to do this?
Well, there's been multiple turning points. I think the most recent one was probably when I released my first record, solo record, Resolutions, and I got asked to do the revival tour, and that was with Chuck Ragan, Brian Fallon, Dan Andriano, and myself. It was a collaborative acoustic event, and Joe Ginsberg and John Gaunt played upright bass and fiddle. But on that tour, as it was rolling through, in fact, Amsterdam was the town where Brian Fallon was like, you should keep doing this solo thing. It's really working. And I guess I just was so, I was so just plowing forward, you know, playing a show every day. They would take a day off, I'd play in another town. I wasn't really that cognizant of what was happening. And each individual guy on that tour at different points pulled me aside and was like, yeah, you might want to stick with this. This is, you know, something you're good at and something that's working. And that was a big moment of like, oh, wow, these people have been working as musicians professionally for a long time. My band was on a hiatus or had sort of like mostly disintegrated. And so to have all these people say like, hey man, this is working, you should do this, was really helpful and really inspiring. You know, it was like, okay, I'll do it, I'll keep going.
But in that sense then, where was your mind kind of, because the band you mentioned, the Loved Ones, kind of that went on hiatus. So where was your mind after that band went on hiatus? So did you see yourself staying in music?
Well, I think that's a daily, well, not daily, but I think that has come up many times, in fact, before this record. When you struggle with writer's block or self-doubt and things like that, there comes points in the road where you're like, oh, maybe I should just get a job or I'm not sure what to do, you know, because it is a confusing life, you know, especially coming from where I come from. There's not a whole lot of examples of people who are working class musicians, you know. It's like there's people who have hits and who are huge. And then there's a lot of people who get to a certain point and decide to quit or get a job that just supports their family or whatever. And so the middle is hard to know how to navigate. But thankfully, early on, I worked for Sick of It All and worked for the Bouncing Souls. And those were two bands that were examples of like, you know, now they're legacy bands or whatever. They've been around for 30 years. But even then, 15 years ago, they had been going for a long time and had made multiple records. So those were really good examples of dignified ways to form a music career, you know.
And so when it comes to songwriting and for your solo material, did this working class background, did that seep through immediately?
I think so. I think for me, it's important to try to write from an honest perspective. You know, you want to add as much creative license, you know, and make things interesting, even if it's not entirely true to what happened. But yeah, it's important for me to come from an honest perspective, and that is where I come from, and to write the stories that are true for the people that I grew up with and the people that I know and stuff like that. So it's interesting now that I don't live in Philadelphia, to start to be surrounded by a different set of people and to listen to their stories and try to write those as well. It'll be interesting going forward now, you know, now that I've sort of made like the Philadelphia record or whatever.
Well, yeah, Bury Me in Philly, it's very much, it's kind of the way I see it, that transition period between living in Philadelphia and then moving to California. So what made you go west?
I've always wanted to live in California. I traveled out there as a 18-year-old kid to get tattooed, of all things, you know. And I went to San Francisco and fell in love with the place and thought it was really a great culture and very different from the East Coast. And I always wanted to move to California. And then I met a girl that I'm now going to marry that lives in Santa Barbara. So that was what compelled me to go and move there ultimately. Was, you know, people always move for work or for love, you know.
Sure.
I moved for love.
Is it a tattoo you can show?
Oh yeah, it was this whole sleeve. You know, that's why I went out to San Francisco. It was like from here down, I think, somewhere in there. The guy that tattooed, he was from Philly and he had moved to San Francisco to sort of expand his portfolio.
Right.
Yeah.